Some big shifts in life are up to us, and other ones come without any warning at all and without our permission. Mark used to live in Albany, and he's made it big since then. He's somebody that used to go to my former parish, but now he's an author and a professor and lives out west. And I learned that recently he went for his annual physical, and the doctor gave him the dreaded news. He had no symptoms at all, but the doctor told him that he had a serious form of cancer. And he said, at the moment the doctor said those words, the door that I walked through to keep that appointment disappeared. There was no way to walk through that door again. Everything in my life had changed, and I could not find the door that I used to get into that appointment. Has that ever happened to you? A moment that big, that dramatic a shift? I know that it happens to a lot of us in different ways because I sit with a lot of couples preparing for marriage, and I sit with a lot of families who've just lost a loved one. And when I sit with them and I ask, tell me the story, in the case of a couple, for example, tell me the story of how you met. It's not everybody's story, but it is not at all rare that the person will say, I remember the day like it was yesterday. I was sitting there minding my own business, and she walked in the room, and I thought, oh my goodness, there's my wife. Or I just had finished talking to this stranger, and as soon as he left, I picked up my phone and I texted my best friend, I just met my future husband. And they're right. It's not everybody's story, not by a long shot, but it's not uncommon at all. And whether the situation in your life was meeting a spouse and realizing without having any warning that this is the one for me, or if it's something much less pleasant like getting news in a doctor's office like Mark, all of those things happen without warning and without permission. They're not convenient usually. Sometimes someone meets their future spouse while they're already seriously dating someone else. That's also not an unusual part of that story. But these moments demand that we pay attention. They can't be ignored. But what we do with them is often up to us. And that's what we're hearing about in the readings today. We are being challenged to consider how faithful we can be when an unexpected invitation comes our way. If we hear God calling, how are we going to respond? You know that famous psalm we sing several times during the year. If today you hear God's voice, how hard will your heart be? And it's funny because in the case of my friend Mark, he didn't have a lot of choices. He couldn't go back through the door he entered. It had disappeared. He couldn't run for the exit. But when God calls us in other situations, the door that we entered doesn't disappear. We could easily just go back the way we came. We can, in fact, run for the exit. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, will we? And if not, what will help us not do the natural thing and run for the exit? I used to work with someone who was an amateur triathlete. She would compete in all of these incredible triathlon type events. And so whenever I would ask her what she was doing that weekend, she would say something wild, like going on a 40-mile run, something crazy. And I would ask her, how do you stay motivated to do that all the time? And she said, oh, I don't. My motivation is like a roller coaster. It's my commitment that doesn't change. I'm committed to that. Some days that's all I've got to lean on, because there's plenty of days I don't want any part of this. But I've made a commitment, and doggone it, I'm going to stick with it. And this is what we're hearing about in the gospel today, that Jesus is very dramatically placing some examples before us of wavering. And some of them are very understandable, but he's challenging us to consider the harsh reality that Lisa, that triathlete, gave me, that our emotions are going to take us here, there, and everywhere. Our motivation is going to waver. Our comfort level is going to be different on some days than others. But our commitment is up to us. And maybe one of the ways we could consider that commitment being strengthened is to voluntarily do what Mark had no choice in, and board up the exit that we would take, to brick up the exit that is ours to take, and to voluntarily choose to take away that option. I am told that in the ancient Christian world, before the entire rest of the globe had been explored and discovered, Christians that were going on mission found Scotland to be the worst and hardest assignment. It was only accessible by boat at the time, and it was known for being constantly foggy and drizzly and cold, like Glens Falls in March. And when you got there, the people there were not extraordinarily glad to see you. And so if you were assigned as a missionary to Scotland, you got the very hardest assignment. And so legend has it that the first thing that Scottish missionaries would do when they arrived was they would bring their boat to the shore, they would drag the boat up onto the rocky shoreline, and they would burn it. It was the only way that they wouldn't want to get in it and sail away. Are we willing to burn the boat that would take us out of where we are? That's really what marriage is, isn't it? It's saying, all right, we've got a trowel in our hand, and we brick up the exit. And once we've got it all mortared in, we drop the trowel and we say, okay, let's do this. Here we are. Priesthood is similar too. It took me a long time. I knew when I was 18 that I was called to do it, but I didn't want to brick up the exit. I wanted to leave at least a little opening so I could get some fresh air. But eventually, no. You brick up the exit and you say, here we are. Let's do this. Some of you may know that I have a beloved uncle, my godfather, who's had a very hard year. He lives in Troy, and he turned 80 this year. He's a loner, and actually, a lot of us have loners in our lives that we know. He's right on the edge of super loner, like recluse, and a lot of us know people like that as well. He is beloved to me, but he's not an easy person to persuade. I took him out for his 80th birthday to his favorite place in November, Ted's Fish Fry, down in Waterville. You know how good that is. And he looked just so-so to me, but I thought, well, I've got to accept that he's aging. But then a month later, I went uninvited to his house, and he was in terrible shape. It took me a long time to persuade him to let me take him to the emergency room. He hadn't seen a doctor in 40 years. And that led to 4 months of rehabilitation, and now he's doing well. He's living in the same senior center that Father Mackey lives in. I think dropping that name might help me get him in there, by the way. But anyway, he has to sell his house. We're in the process right now of selling this beloved family home where he and my mom were raised. And there's no way he could go back there. I'll spare you some of the details, but I'll just say that the black mold problem alone is preventing anyone from living there anytime soon. But because of the housing market, it is going to sell. And my family and I were trying to figure out, what do we do to help our sweet Uncle Dan make his way through this transition? He lived there 78 of his 80 years. How are we going to help him say goodbye? And you know what we've come to realize? We had all these plans. We could have a little prayer service inside the house. We could light candles on the porch. We could do this. We could do that. And in talking to him, we've realized, no, brick up the exit. Don't go back. He's burned the boat. He's safely at a senior house, and he's doing well. And it's better for him to brick up the exit. He has to be like one of those missionaries who burns the boat and doesn't return. Life provides us with moments where that is actually the right choice. And the question for us is, am I there right now? Would I be available if God called me to something, or if life presented something to me so that I would be willing to board up my route of egress, brick up the exit? Would I be willing to take that trowel and mortar in all of the bricks and then throw it down and look at God and say, here I am. Let's do this.